We welcome Zach Berry of OM Spirit, and win totals week continues because FanDuel dropped all these win totals on us. And first of all, the Super Bowl just ended. There's no football for a good long time. We need to think about football. We need to think party positive football thoughts, Zach. So what better way than to try to figure out how does Ole Miss get over 9.5 wins? Because that is the total that has been set. That is the same as Alabama, the same as LSU, and the only two schools in the SEC that have a higher projected win total, Georgia and Texas at 10.5. So interesting spot that's not where Ole Miss is used to starting the season, but given the way last season ended, given everybody who's back, it feels like the right spot.
Do you have that stat handy when the last time Alabama's win total was this low?
2016.
Okay, so it's kind of recent. Okay.
Yeah, they were losing Derrick Henry. They were losing a ton on the defense. They were losing Kenyon Drake. You didn't know who the quarterback was going to be because remember Hurts was a freshman, so everybody's thinking it was Blake Barnett or Cooper. Yep, Kiffin had just left. Yeah, so
full circle.
That's exactly right.
We talk a lot about on our show. I believe you and I have briefly touched on it. I think this is Ole Miss. Jackson Dart coined the phrase, kind of stealing from Michael Jordan, calling it the last dance. A lot of guys came back on this team. They added a ton in the portal. And look, I do think this is the window for Lane Kiffin. I think this is when you have to strike and you have to take advantage with, in my opinion, the two toughest games on the schedule are at home in Georgia and Oklahoma. You get Georgia November 9th and Oklahoma late October. You get a nice runway in the beginning of the year with four, I call them cupcakes, Furman, MTSU, Wake Forest. At Wake is not anywhere near as dangerous as it was in recent years, but
yeah, two or 3 years ago, you're looking at that like a coin flip, but now you're not thinking that way.
And then Georgia Southern, and then you go head first into SEC play. I think 10-2 is absolutely a realistic thing. And I know with FanDuel with the 9.5 with the hook, it makes it tricky because let's say Ole Miss loses one, it's not supposed to. Or, there's some injury concerns. Guys are banged up. They lose a tight one. Last second field goal type deal. 9-3. I'm still sticking with 10-2. I think the amount of talent and experience coming back on offense, and then the added firepower of Juice Wells. The word is still that Logan Diggs is going to be ready by conference play. I don't know if that'll be Kentucky or if it'll be into October. But I know there's been some back and forth on that. How's the knee? Is he going to be ready? I think that's just an added bonus, Andy. I think Ulysses Bentley is more than capable of being a number one guy. And it's not talked about enough, but Ole Miss really likes the true sophomore that'll be behind him, and Kedrick Riscano, 4-star guy from Texas that Ole Miss beat out a ton of really good programs for. He's just chomping at the bit, waiting for his turn. So Diggs would be an excellent addition to that backfield as you get into SEC play. And I also anticipate Ole Miss at least kicking the tires a little bit in the spring period in the portal if there's any guys that get in. So, I would go over. I feel pretty confident with the defensive additions and Jackson Dart in the third year.
And what makes that so interesting is in the new SEC, in the new playoff format, 10-2 in the SEC feels like you're just you're asking, are they going to make the playoff or not? Because if they're 10-2, I would think they're in.
I would think so. In truly 9-3, nowhere near a guarantee. But depending on what,
especially with their non-conference schedule.
Yeah, if it's a weird year where it's a bunch of people are losing, and it'll be top heavy. It's always going to be top heavy with at least 2 or 3 people running the. Michigan, Ohio State running the table. Maybe you have somebody in the ACC, Florida State keeps pace with what Norvell's built down there. But yeah, I mean, if it gets kind of bogged down around that, 6, 7, 8 seed range, that could be something that you could slide in there, depending on, I don't, I do you know, Andy, the metrics that the committee looks at? Because I feel like it
It's the
changes
same
every year.
ones. It's allegedly the same ones. It's supposed to be 12 best and not 12 most deserving or anything like that. What will be interesting to see, like, I am curious, like you just mentioned, what are they going to use? Because I do think strength of schedule probably should matter quite a bit more here. And
Yeah.
a 9-3 team that played a brutally tough schedule, or a 9-3 team that played what is perceived to be an easier schedule, I would think that would be an easy tiebreaker for you. So and Ole Miss, I mean, as these things go, got a nice draw from the SEC, and their non-conference is not so bad. Like you think about it, they get Georgia at home, they get Oklahoma at home, Kentucky, South Carolina, not too bad. At Florida, Lord knows what Florida's going to be at that point in the season, because they will be in the teeth of one of the worst stretches of schedule you've ever seen in your life.
It's
But
so bad.
yeah, it is terrible.
God.
Nick Delatorre and I talked about it this week, and it, like, every time you look at it, it looks worse. So now that said, you got to go to the Swamp the week after you play Georgia. There is a, do you get beat?
Yeah.
Well, no, actually, there's an open date. That's right. It's a 2 open date season. I keep forgetting that.
I hate they don't put it in the schedule, like, because I don't want to do math. That's why.
It is tough, but it is. This is fascinating, because let's talk about what Ole Miss brings back, because we keep saying it, but I think offensively,
sure,
to help people understand, Trey Harris had a great first season in Oxford, and then had an NFL decision to make. He decides to come back. Prieskorn, the tight end, decides to come back. Everybody knows what happens with Quinshon Judkins. He left. Ulysses Bentley, who averaged 6 yards a carry, 6.7 yards a carry, is back. And then most of the line.
Yeah, so bring back pretty much everybody up front. And then, oh, by the way, you add 2 guys from the Joe Moore award-winning offensive line from Washington, and Nate Kalipo, Julius Buello. You also bring in Jerquan Scott from Southern Miss, a guy that's played a ton of football, experienced guy that's going to be on the interior, help with, again, Kiffin. That's Kiffin's MO. We're going to run the football. We're going to be physical, and then we'll set everything up off of that. But yeah, I mean, it got to the point last year where Trey Harris was just, he was damn near automatic. I mean, in the Peach Bowl, I was shocked that everybody in the bins knew number 9 was getting the football, and Penn State just couldn't stop him. I mean, it was nothing fancy. It was just an over route or a comeback or a curl, or, just, it wasn't a trick play, no window dressing. There was nothing fancy. Just, hey, he's our best guy, and we're just going to keep throwing it to him until you stop it. And Penn State couldn't do it, and nobody really could last year.
Well, and the Juice Wells edition is the one that, it kind of depends on which Juice Wells you're getting. Are you getting the healthy version who was just, unstoppable, or are you getting the one who was banged up for most of the season last year at South Carolina and you never really got to see it? There's a possibility that Juice Wells might be the best receiver in the SEC if he's healthy.
Well, and I think it's big for Ole Miss with Trey Harris and Jordan Watkins coming back. You're not having to ask Juice Wells, hey, we need you to come in and be the dude and catch 10, 12 balls a game. Now, he very well could catch 10, 12 balls a game if people are just bracketing Trey Harris, taking away Jordan Watkins in the slot. But he's not having to be the number 1 dude. There's not a ton of pressure on him to get those touches every single week. But yeah, I think from what I've been told by people up in Columbia and around him, the foot is good. And I think it's also fair to say that Ole Miss probably did their own research and made sure that he was good to go. And that's kind of my thing with Logan Diggs too, is Ole Miss signed him expecting him to contribute. But yeah, and then I don't think Prieskorn gets talked about enough. He was banged up all last season, up and down. He had some off the field stuff with a death in the family that, just incredible. Just to play through that and continue to improve. And by the time it got to the Peach Bowl, I mean, he was unstoppable. I think his presence in that offense, along with a guy like Daquan Wright from Virginia Tech, who is an athletic freak. Charles Power and Cody Belair loved him out of high school. He was a late bloomer, a really versatile ex tight end who I think will complement Priestcorn's kind of throwback, almost like a Jeremy Shockey type tight end who's
Yeah.
big, physical possession guy who's going to get those first downs for you. But Daquan Wright's a dude that can really spread the field and get out in space. So the offense, it's crazy to even think the offense is getting so much attention in the same cycle when the defense lands Walter Nolan, Princey Umamielen, Pooh Paul, Trey Amos. I mean, the defensive additions are pretty loud as well.
Well, and the defensive additions were pretty critical because offensively, we kind of know what we're getting from Ole Miss. And obviously, if Juice Wells is a healthy version of himself, you're talking about an offense that could be as productive as maybe that LSU one last year when they had Jaden Daniels and Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors. But this one on defense, you saw in the Georgia game, it was like, okay, this is where Ole Miss is deficient. This is just up front defensively. This is where they have to get better. And they did. They went out and got – so Princely Umamielen was one of Florida's better defensive linemen. He hopped in the portal, and they picked him up. Walter Nolan, everybody knows, was a number 1 overall recruit, signed with Texas A&M. It was kind of up and down, but when he's on, he lives up to the hype.
Yeah. You get the number 1 defensive lineman in the portal, the number 2 edge, the number 3 wide receiver. Trey Amos, I don't think is getting enough pub.
Oh, from Alabama, yeah.
I mean, when I talked with Travis Rayer from BOL, I was like, you've seen him. I want to hear what you have to say, but here's my scouting report. Nick Saban thinks that he's legit, so there you go.
Well, yeah. When Terrion Arnold went out against Tennessee last year, they threw Trey Amos in and felt completely comfortable with him in their defense. And you saw how good that secondary was last year. So if he was good enough to hang in that secondary, he's going to be good enough to play pretty much anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, he's the number 1 corner there any other year when Kool-Aid McKinstry and Terrion Arnold are NFL guys. But hey, in the SEC championship, Kool-Aid gets hurt. They bring him in, puts the clamps down on Brock Bowers. Had a couple big pass breakups late in that one. So, yeah, it's a seasoned guy. And he was really good at Louisiana before he got to Alabama. So, again, the theme of experienced, older guys that are going to come in, know the deal. They're going to buy into the whole pro mindset, the culture that the locker room already has with the returning production on defense because JJ Pegues is back. Jared Ivey's back. TJ Dudley got to play in the bowl game. He will be eligible for the full season, coming off the edge, playing some outside linebacker. So it's a defense that is still, John Saunders is back. I think the secondary is going to be very different and look very different. But I think, Yam Banks is someone that doesn't get talked about a lot, as a lot of these guys committed in kind of a flurry where it was 2 or 3 at a time, where it was a lot of excitement. And then there are a couple guys that don't get talked about enough, but Yam Banks, NFL scouts love him. He had a decision too and decided to play 1 more year back closer to home. So it's going to be a fun defense. It's going to look very different, but I'm excited to see what Pete Golding does with them.
Well, and the Lane Kiffin question is he going to start winning the games that maybe they aren't supposed to win? Because they've got to the point where they win the ones they're supposed to win now. And last year it was Alabama and Georgia. Okay, could you get over the hump? And it doesn't happen. This year it's definitely Georgia at home. I honestly don't know if there's another one of those because I think Oklahoma, depending on where they're at, Ole Miss, good chance they're favored in that game. At LSU, we don't know what LSU is going to be.
Yeah, and that's mid-October. It's on the road, so winning on the road in the SEC is hard no matter what. That's the big thing that I'm sure you've talked about it plenty with people with Texas and Oklahoma. I've heard a couple, national guys. Shout out to Roddy Jones. He mentioned it on a show
Yep.
a couple months ago where, hey, Texas and Oklahoma, you're not going to have these sleepy road games anymore where people are, reading a novel and just kicking back. I mean, this is going to be week in, week out, raucous environments, especially Texas. No disrespect to Oklahoma, but I mean, Texas is going to be everybody's Super Bowl this year.
Everybody hates Texas. Like it's even teams that have never played them before hate them.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a very underestimated thing that people are talking about it, but I think once it's a tangible thing that you can see on a Saturday, where, and I know Quinn Ewers in Texas beat Bama in Tuscaloosa already, so they can do it. But week in, week out, are you going to?
It's actually funny with Texas because sort of the knock on Texas was they would play up or down relative to the level of competition. Like you almost worry with Texas, like if they come into a hyped road environment against an inferior opponent, they're like, oh, we are supposed to show up today. And so, although I think they've probably solved that. Like the consistency feels there with Texas. We don't know yet with Oklahoma. Like, it's interesting that you mentioned kind of the sleepy somebody reading a book. Well, now it wasn't reading a book. I believe it was knitting at Kansas a few years ago. The book reading guy was at Florida State back in the Willie Taggart days. But there was a young lady knitting while the Kansas game was going on. That doesn't happen anymore either, as Oklahoma learned the hard way last year. So it's
Andy, wasn't it a couple years ago in Oklahoma? Or excuse me, Kansas just let people into games for free.
Yes.
Like they were just.
I've been to a game in Kansas when they were terrible, and it is friends and family only. Or back then, like now they love it. Like Lance Leipold's done an incredible job, and they bring people. Yeah. But what Oklahoma and Texas are walking into, like what they will see Texas knows about at Arkansas. They just went there a few years ago, but like when you go to Fayetteville, when you go to Oxford, when you go to Starkville, like it's going to be wild every single time.
Yeah. Well, I was talking with some guys last night about Oklahoma's schedule. And it's pretty tough too. The non-conference is whatever, but hosting Tennessee September 21st at Auburn, then you get a bye, then you get the Red River game against Texas. Host South Carolina at Ole Miss. You get a break with Maine at Missouri. Then you get an open date hosting Alabama at LSU to close.
Brutal.
I mean, even with the Maine and the open date, like it's just we talk about it all the time. And look, I hate to do the like, well, we know about it. We've lived it. Like you're gonna find out, but like that's true. I mean, it just pounds you just week in, and like it's impossible to get through a year without getting banged up, and that's what it's so important to mention that when talking about these win totals is, Jackson Dart, dude is tough as hell, but he is yet to go through a season without being banged up, and
you're gonna run if you're Ole Miss's quarterback in this offense.
Yeah, and look, I don't know if Kiffin's had these conversations with Jackson Dart. I know his dad has joked about it. It's like, man, you got to slide. You got to get down. I mean, he did it in the Georgia game. Andy, Ole Miss is down 30 points, and he tries to run over two Georgia guys. And he did, but he also got hurt. So that linebacker mentality at quarterback gets you into trouble. But
is Walker Howard the next guy if that happens?
Yeah, I think so. It's interesting with Austin Simmons, the kid from Florida that Ole Miss flipped from Florida that jumped up 2 classes. The staff loves him, raves about him, and talking with him, he doesn't sound like an 18-year-old. He sounds like he's 21 years old, 22, very mature kid. But yeah, Walker Howard would be next man up, and I know that they're excited about him as well, obviously. But it's just it's tough. And how's Jackson Arnold going to respond on the road, down 10 with 8 minutes to go type thing? Incredibly talented, no doubt about that.
Ole Miss fans just had flashbacks to Johnny Manziel, his Heisman year.
Golly, Mike Hilton probably still wakes up in a cold sweat all the time, trying to tackle him.
That was cold blooded. What he did to Ole Miss that year, it was unbelievable. But this is a different. Like that's the thing. Like this feels different for Ole Miss because even in the Freeze years when they had a pretty good, pretty talented team, there was still those moments where it's like, oh, they're plucky Ole Miss. They're not supposed to be here. Like they will walk into this season where they are supposed to be one of the best teams in the country.
Yeah. I think that's one of the bigger things about the experience and the older player that Ole Miss has targeted out of the portal. You know, outside of, I think I went down the line and looked at it. Outside of a Morian Walker, the corner from Michigan, pretty much everybody in this portal class are experienced dudes that have started at least a full year or played multiple years. So yeah, that the expectation of, hey, we're no longer the underdog. Like we are the hunted now. I think Ole Miss, they were the hunted for most of last year, but you're still the Alabama, the Georgia. Like no one expects you to get it done. You're not expected to win this game. It's just, hey, free shot. Like that was the term that was used all the time with Ole Miss when they were, you know, the spunky underdog. Now, like, you're getting some early preseason odds to win it all. So how do they manage those expectations in the locker room and, you know, staying up every week, you know, with some of those SEC games that, hey, you might be a 9.5, 10-point favorite.
Yep. Now better get used to it. Cause I think Lane's kind of figured out this system. Like how now maybe the system changes as we're recording this. They just had a hearing in Tennessee that potentially could change the NIL rules, but it feels like Ole Miss is one of the best at dealing with this new system and navigating it. So, I mean, until something materially changes, they're probably going to be able to put together some pretty good rosters. And you said, the get old, stay old mentality, it's like basketball. It's like, you know, that's what the basketball coaches always want because they feel like that team's going to be tougher in March. Like, and Ole Miss has, I think, has more depth than we've seen in a long time.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. Especially on both sides now with the offensive linemen that were picked up in the portal. Because Ole Miss has some dudes on the offensive line already that have played a ton of football, played a lot last year. Now you bring in two guys from Washington, played a lot of football, going to compete. That's been Kiffin's whole mantra since he got to Ole Miss. We saw it last year. They get Spencer Sanders, they get Walker Howard, they get Austin Simmons. Why do you have so many quarterbacks? Kiffin's, I'm just going to find who the best guy is.
Yeah, because they're going to transfer anyway if it doesn't work out. Like, you don't need to be sentimental about it. It's fine.
Like it's the lottery ticket mentality, like in baseball recruiting. Yeah, sure. You sign all these guys for your baseball class. Okay, maybe the top 4 or 5 are probably going to go pro, but what if they don't? Then you get them.
Right. So, what if two pitchers decide to come play for you? Now you got them for 3 years. I think you're right. It's amazing how different coaches have approached all of this differently. But Lane Kiffin, Mike Norvell, you know, those guys seem to have figured out this is how it works best.
It's a good look. Nobody's better at segues than you, Andy. I wrote a piece the other day drawing some parallels with the Florida State team this past year with Ole Miss, with some guys at crucial spots, and how, you know, basically Norvell and the Noles built to last year. And we all know what happened, but the Jared Verse coming back, getting Braden Fisk, getting Keon Coleman, they had all of these high caliber instant impact transfers that just knock it out of the park, played lights out. They run the table.
Right. Braden Fisk and Keon Coleman are top 100 NFL draft picks. Like they are very good play and maybe top 50. And that's exactly, I mean, that's your Juice Wells. Like Juice Wells, Keon Coleman is the hope. You hope that Juice Wells does for Ole Miss what Keon Coleman did for Florida State.
You're exactly right.
So, well, Zach, I think you may have convinced me. I think I may be able to go over on Ole Miss too. This is because it is literally FanDuel asking the question, do you think Ole Miss is going to make the playoff? And
Pretty much, yeah.
I look at the schedule and I think it's a distinct possibility. So Zach Berry, thank you so much.
Yep. See ya.
Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples on 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.